Welcome to this podcast. And as we build up to the inaugural edition of Bio360 Africa in Johannesburg in June, we're very excited to take you on this series of so-called deep dives into the African bioenergy scene to try and gain an insight into the current day context and state of play for bioenergy across the continent. So we'll be looking into the opportunities that exist to scale bioenergy and the drivers and challenges that the sector faces that, when overcome, will enable bioenergy to come of age and play a significant role in the overall African energy mix, whilst at the same time delivering the multiple benefits that are inherent in any sustainably managed biomass project, from local economy and employment benefits, as well as environmental, energy and food security and health benefits. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by the African Biomass Company, a rolled up sleeves kind of organization, I think we can say, who do the nitty gritty work out in the field, on the ground, to source, process and supply biomass at scale across South Africa and beyond. And in the hot seat today, we have Koibus du Plessis, Commercial Manager of African Biomass Company. Welcome, Koibus.
No, thank you so much, Paul. Pleasure to joining you today.
Great to have you aboard. And I say the hot seat, I'm speaking lightheartedly. This is more of a fireside chat than a dragon's den, so please feel relaxed.
No, thank you.
We're really excited and very happy, and African Biomass Company has identified Bio360 as a portal and a platform that you think is strategically of interest to the sector. First of all, thank you very much for electing to be one of our sponsors. That's fantastic news. So we're very happy and very pleased and welcome aboard as a sponsor as well as a podcast invite.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. I must be saying we're also very excited about it. I believe that Bio360 is the first show of its kind in South Africa this year, but obviously a platform that will continue up in Africa later on. And I think in the whole sort of biomass to energy space, it's the first time that all the role players could potentially attend a dedicated platform. Previously, it was always sidelined on shows. There was no dedicated show in the space. So from an Africa biomass point of view, we're very excited to be sponsors, but also very excited to have all the role players around the same table.
Well, thanks for that endorsement. That, if you like, is based on our experience, because we've been organizing Bio360 now in Europe for 20 years, and previously it was separate events, and we just decided that there was more logic in bringing everything together and having all of the biosphere under one roof, because there are lots of synergies between these different sectors, and that's the kind of platform that we hope to develop in Africa, so that those with biomass resources of different kinds can meet with those who can help them create value from that, and they work out the best pathway to achieve that. But talking about achieving the pathway, that brings us straight on to the subject of logistics and of biomass supply. So I want to jump straight in on this with you, because it's all very well to talk about smart, new, innovative technologies, of which there are many, but to deliver a bioenergy project, would you agree with me that it is fair to say that securing reliable biomass supply is probably the biggest challenge in putting together a bioenergy project?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the big challenges when it comes to these projects. The technology is there and has been there for years, but is to get the security of supply and actually build those supply chains. And then in many instances, there's still a massive gap in education where people believe that biomass is just lying around and not considering, there's various feedstocks, but those various feedstocks, not all biomass are created equal, can only be used in certain applications. So we've seen many projects in Africa where technology was chosen, and then the assumption was made that, the biomass available would be suitable for that specific technology. And in many instances, this is not the case. So you have quite a few stranded projects where the whole supply chain around the fuel source was overlooked or underestimated. And that's always very difficult, once you have a project going, to then try and adapt the fuel to that project, whereas it should have be done the other way around, where you actually first analyze your biomass feedstocks and then the potential technology that would apply to that to achieve whatever you set out to achieve.
I think it's true to say that this kind of slightly belated thinking of how we're going to manage the biomass feedstock is issue of addressing that to later in the day rather than earlier in the day is common in many places. I mean, we hear that's the same issue being raised in other parts of the world. So it's something that project developers. Would you say that it's project developers come a little bit late to you and yeah, I think that's what you're saying. It's a project development issue to
Yeah,
start with. What is our biomass and how do we deal with our biomass?
absolutely. We see it all the time. The biomass supplier or processor sometimes gets left out of the planning bit of the project, and it's sort of dealt with on an RFQ basis instead of seeing the supplier and the processor as an integral part of the whole planning process. And then you have all kinds of project hiccups afterwards in it's silly things, for example, a bunker that wasn't sized correctly, or assumptions that was made on certain feedstocks, which is impossible to process to the specification that it's required. So little niggles like that. In actual fact, at Africa Biomass Company, we now insist that we are part of the planning of a project. If we are going to be a fuel supplier or a fuel processor for that project, we want to be part of the planning from the get-go. Firstly, it's just to develop some of these supply chains and feedstocks and harvesting contracts and, to supply security of supply. All of that takes a lot of time. It's not like you can just get your hands on the biomass on a 24-hour period notice or something like that. But some of the guys think, it's as easy as that. And then to actually get the right processing technologies for the specific feedstock and specification that's required. Those steps actually takes a serious amount of time. So yeah, it's for us that is we've been in the game now for 23 years, and that's just from experience. We now request and say, listen, we actually want to be part of the biomass feedstock all the way until it goes into the process. May that be combustion or pyrolysis or whatever it's going to be, gasification or biomass to liquid. We actually want to be part of that feedstock until it sort of goes into your process, into your reactor or into your boiler. Even with as far as going, we have a whole engineering team here. Especially when it comes to the physical biomass handling up to that. Because even there we see sometimes assumptions. It's the biomass is now in the right format, but, a project sometimes would struggle with the materials handling bit of that project to feed whatever they need to feed. So yeah, that's sort of just a philosophy or change in our philosophy. We said, listen, we want to be part of the solution rather the problem. It's hindsight always 2020, but it's better to plan for these things.
Yeah, it's clearly the voice of experience that's speaking there. That's your experience. How would you say that, and you've got 20 years of history to see how the market has evolved, how thinking and how things have developed over time. Would you say that your thinking has developed to saying we need to be involved early? Are people coming to you earlier in the process now? Has that message seeping through, getting into the marketplace? Project developers, technology providers, are they coming to you at sufficiently early stage enough now, or is there still work to be done to make that standard practice?
No, there's still work that needs to be done. We obviously have some companies that we deal with and that we are part of what I would call a second rodeo or a third rodeo. And we've learned together out of first projects. But what's currently happening in South Africa, and I think Southern Africa in a sense, is that our fuel or fossil fuel, traditional fossil fuel like coal, used to be very cheap. And there wasn't big market drivers to drive people away from it. So the technology and the fuel was sort of set in stone for the last 40, 50 years. And I think the big mistake is people think of biomass like they would think of other fossil fuels. And within that lies the problem. And there's still a lot of education that needs to be done in that regard. So you would still see technology partners and fuel suppliers and processors, especially guys that have not done such projects before sort of plan the project in silos. And I think a big challenge is to actually get the role players together and to actually talk to people and to understand what is the challenges for each, and then get rid of the assumptions. So I do believe in the market is still very young in Africa, and there are some European companies that came in and obviously came in with that experience. But I believe there's a massive drive for biomass, and especially biomass to energy. And I think there's still a lot of mistakes that's going to happen if there's not a sort of a central platform, or if the advocacy levels around biomass projects are not lifted, so that you get professionals that are actually educated in biomass to understand the challenges.
Are those challenges, how would you say, in a South African context or sub-Saharan, because in fact African Biomass Company operates borders of South Africa, what would you say to somebody that's looking from outside that has knowledge of biomass development projects in their home countries or in other parts of the world? What are the key factors they need to be taking into account in terms of wanting to set up and operate in South Africa?
I think it's firstly to understand feedstock challenges, to make 100% sure that the feedstock you decide on, or the mix of feed you decide on, can actually be processed to what you require at your plant. I think that's the one gap that we always see. There's some serious assumptions about simple things, like guys would think of alien invasives, and then they would like to process it into dimensional wood chips, and you go like, but it's not really possible. You need to look at something that's more towards a hog fuel specification, for example. I think that's one of the big challenges. And then also the cost around biomass. There's lots of assumptions that people make that, the biomass is for free and I can compete with fossil fuels and so forth. And yes, you can, but it's going to depend on what specification you require, and obviously what feedstock selection you're going to do. And then the thing is, biomass, I always sort of joke about it, but biomass has an address. So if you go from place to place, that feedstock's going to differ and the availability is going to differ. And your costings around actually sourcing your biomass from acquisition to all the steps it needs to go through processing all adds costs. And I've seen many projects where there's assumptions around the guys sort of put a benchmark to what they can get the biomass for, and then they develop their project, and then afterwards they realize, but this is not possible. We can't get this biomass at this price or something like that. So I think if I can summarize it, it's the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa is education. It's probably feedstock selection, as I said. And then, the fact that all biomass are not created equal, and that biomass has an address. So you need to take all those factors into account when you plan your project, or into your project feasibility at least. So another thing that we see as well is lots of projects that sort of are developed at larger scale, where they could have benefited at, doing an MVP kind of minimum viable product kind of approach, where start out small, or start out with a pilot plant or a test plant, really test your assumptions prior to going to financial close on big amounts.
Okay, so this question of variability of the biomass feedstock and being localized according to which part of a country or a region we're looking at. Is there publicly available information, mapping information that kind of says this kind of biomass, this species grows in what these where, and is there some way that people can be guided to understand what these specific biomass resources are and where they're available?
Yeah, it actually differs from country to country. It's usually from tertiary education institutions
Right.
where we get some information from, but Paul, not nearly enough. I mean, it's something that's been on a concern for project developers for very long, because it's very difficult to find theoretical sources on the available biomass. So to the point where we now actually started a division in our company, like a consultancy, we would physically go out for project developers and then secure the biomass, physically quantify different species, come up with sort of a layered approach. Say, listen, for your specific project, you would require, for example, forestry residue from this area, you would require alien invasives, you would require potential agricultural end of life, sort of vineyards and orchards. I'm just naming examples. But to get to that security of supply is actually not easy. Actually, it's not information that's readily available to people out there. And I believe the acceleration of biomass and biomass to energy projects in sub-Saharan Africa could actually be done quicker if that knowledge became sort of public. So you see two kinds of things. It's either people are overestimating the availability on biomass with very large scale projects in specific regions, or the biomass is available, but because they don't know or don't get the security of supply, they struggle to get the projects to financial close. So it seems to be one or the other. And it all relates back to something like biomass quantification and mapping for different feedstock streams to at least have a proper guesstimate, or at least a guesstimate that you can use in feasibilities to arrive at a plus minus right or wrong answer.
So we seem to have hit on a key point there. And with your experience over more than 2 decades, in fact, this is now a consultancy service that you propose because you've seen it as a bottleneck for projects, and you can step in here and partially fill the gap. But I would think it's also an area where there are many universities across the region who are capable, very capable, I'm sure, of kind of also fulfilling a similar role. So maybe we'll see that emerging, another way of providing this information that's lacking.
Now, Paul, it says you're 100% right. And just quickly to butt in on the universities. We've actually realized this now, and we've been approaching at least South African universities with their wood sciences and so forth to faculties and their forestry faculties, and to actually point them towards research that would, unlock some of these opportunities within the bioenergy space. And one university that we work closely with is Stellenbosch University in the Western Cape, very close to our head office, and to the point where we actually now offer learnerships at Africa Biomass Company to pull those guys in, to point them to some of these projects and make them available to some project developers to just assist.
Okay, so I think you're talking about the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch.
Yes, 100%.
Yes. So that's good to hear. That's good to hear. So that there are needs in the market that are being addressed both by commercial organizations yourself who have on the ground experience, but also from academia that complement your knowledge as well. So that sounds very positive.